Hello everyone, in this session we will learn how to deploy a multi-container application in Azure App Service using Azure CLI. In this scenario, the multi-container application is represented using Docker Compose file, which is a YAML file, and defines all the services that makes up the application. Azure App Service will use this Docker Compose file as input. In-depth discussion about Docker and Docker Compose is out of scope of this session. However, we'll have a look at a Docker Compose file just to understand the basics of it. For this session, you will need to have the following prerequisites in place: Azure subscription and Azure CLI. Let's have a look at the steps we are going to follow to deploy multi-container application. First, we'll have a look at a Docker Compose file to understand the basics of it. Then we'll create a resource group at a specific location. Now we'll create an app service plan for container-based applications. Next, we'll create a web application for multi-container application using a Docker Compose file. Once created, we'll verify if the deployment of the multi-container application was successful. Let's go ahead and execute the above mentioned steps. In the screen, you can see the Docker Compose file, which is used for defining services, network, and volumes. It has two services, DB and WordPress. Services represent the containers that will be created in the application. Let's talk about the DB service. Image directive is used to mention the image from Docker Hub that will be used for creating the service. DB service will be created using image MySQL with tag 5.7 from the Docker Hub. Volume directive is used for mounting a host path or a named volume to a path on the container. This allows changes in host path or the named volume to be available in the path in the container. The important thing to note here is that Docker Compose will preserve all the volumes used by the service. Hence, any data which exists in the volume will never be lost. To reuse a volume across multiple services, define the named volume at top level using the volumes directive and then use it in the service directive. We have created a volume named db_data at the top level using the volumes directive. In the DB service, we have mounted the volume db_data to the path where libmysql in the container. Any changes in the volume db_data will be visible in the path where libmysql in the container. The restart directive indicates the restart policy, which defines if and how the container needs to be restarted. In DB service, the value always for the restart directive means that the container will always be restarted irrespective of the reason why it was stopped. The environment directive is used to define all the environment variables which are required by the service. In DB service, we are using environment variables MySQL root password, MySQL database, MySQL user, and MySQL password. Now let's talk about the WordPress service. The depends on directive is used for expressing dependency between the services. In case of WordPress service, depends on directive indicates that WordPress service is dependent on the DB service. WordPress service will be created using image WordPress with tag latest from the Docker Hub. Host directive is used to define the mapping of host port and the service port. In case of WordPress service, any request on host port 8000 will be routed to port 80 on the container. WordPress service also uses always as the value for restart directive, which means that container will always be restarted irrespective of the reason why it stopped. In case of WordPress service, we are using environment directive to define the environment variables WordPress_db_host, WordPress_db_user, and WordPress_db_password. Now that we have a basic understanding of the Docker Compose file, let's go ahead and create the Azure App Service components. First, let's create a resource group. For creation of the resource group, we will need a resource group name and a location. Let's define variables for that. Group name to location is us. Command for creation of the resource group is as follows: is that you create the parameter for entering the resource group name, L parameter to enter the location, and then the hyphen O parameter define the format of the command execution output. Now let's create an app service plan. We will need a name for the app service plan. Let's define a variable for that. Few things we need to remember when creating an app service plan for container deployment is that we cannot use free tier. An instance should be Linux instance. Command for creating app service plan for container-based application is as follows. Is that app service plan create. We'll use the G parameter to enter the source group name. We'll use the N parameter to enter the app service plan name. Then we'll use the SKU parameter to enter the tier, which is standard in our case. Then we'll use the is Linux parameter, indicate that we need Linux machine, and then we'll use the fno parameter to define the format of the command execution output. Once we have the app service plan, let's create a web application in that. We will need a name for the web application. Let's define a variable for that. While creating web application for containers, we will have to indicate whether the multi-container configuration type is Compose or Cube. Compose is used for Docker Compose based applications, and Cube is used in case of Kubernetes. In our case, we will be using Compose. In addition to the multi-container config type, we will also have to provide the multi-container configuration file, which is the Docker Compose file in our case. Let's define a variable for the Docker Compose file. Compose file equal to compose upon WordPress XML. Command for creating web application for containers will be as follows. Create -g and we'll use the C parameter to enter the app service plan name. Then we'll use the N parameter to enter the name of the web application. And then we will use multi-container config type to enter the config type, which is Compose in our case. Then we'll use container config file to enter the config file name, which is the variable Docker Compose file name. Then we'll use the O parameter to define the format of the command execution. Sorry, the Docker Compose file name doesn't have an extension of XML. Its extension is YML. Our script for deploying multi-container application is ready. Let's go ahead and execute it. Let's wait for the script execution to complete. Our script execution has completed. Let's check the web application. We are able to load the WordPress application and have successfully deployed a multi-container application in Azure App Service. Thanks for watching this video, and please check description for links to other useful resources.